Financial services and insurance is the biggest spender on technology in the world. We're selling to companies where the IT budget could be $5 billion in one company. So what a luxury problem to sort of build businesses that sell to businesses like that, right?
You see like the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, and you see these very electronified markets, but actually there's half the world's markets are not like that. And there's an absolute mess of data. Can you just talk about that as a problem?
The 2,000 systems that sit in a large financial institution, consider it as random data format. Data is just lying around and you have to make sense of it.
What were the steps that in between then, from those early days when there was 10 of you up to then multi-$100 million company now?
0 to 1 is the hardest thing in the world. Most people don't make it. Then it becomes about scale.
Kind of Gen AI and where that sits in financial kind of services and institution.
I would argue that the AI players are not enterprise ready, right? In my mind, we're probably 2 years away at least.
Is there anything that you would have done differently? Hi, this is Matt Chung, founder of Work in Fintech, and today we're talking to someone who loves using technology to solve hard problems, from writing code as a teenager to getting a PhD in computer science, launching his first business straight out of university, and then founding and exiting Duco, a leading fintech providing AI data automation for financial markets, and now supporting founders as an active investor and an advisor. So hello, Christian Nentwich.
Hello, good morning.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So I think it would be really good to jump straight into some of those things I just mentioned, kind of coding as a teenager and doing a PhD. Were you pretty techie from the day you were born?
Not quite the day I was born, but I think quite early on, when I was sort of 10, 11, we had one of the early PCs, and my father was really into it, sort of teaching himself about technology, and I sort of took it away, started programming BASIC, and then Pascal, and then C++, and sort of getting very involved in games programming and some of sort of the demo scene, as it was called at the time, sort of doing graphical, cool looking stuff, and did that growing up. And then I'm originally from Vienna, Austria, so I did that there, and then moved to the UK to study at UCL in London.
And I guess you loved it so much you decided to spend quite a few years doing a PhD as well.
Yeah, I thought I was going to go into research, right? So I showed up, did the undergraduate degree, enjoyed that, talked to a few professors. I was going to get more into computer graphics, but I was persuaded by Professor Anthony Finkelstein that was all, flashy. It looks nice, but there are real world software engineering problems that had to be solved right now in London. And he did an amazing sales job. And because I thought I was going to end up in academia and be a researcher, I started the PhD, and I finished the PhD. I started a company during the PhD, so that almost sidetracked me. But yeah, I was on that route until I sort of realized a bit later on that maybe research wasn't for me, and sort of the professional academic research wasn't for me, because I think the pace and the publishing culture and all of that it just wasn't for me, right? I felt like solving problems for customers and being very practical was more interesting to me.
So the first company that was set up during that period, how did that come about?
Yeah, this was a university spin out, essentially. So there had been some research done on complex data validation, I guess, shall we call it, sort of taking complex sets of data and sort of writing rules to validate if it's correct or not, and making that very scalable. And I wrote my PhD on that, including automated repair of, how do we fix data when it's wrong. And we saw some potential to commercialize that. And so my professors at the time, I guess convinced me that maybe we should set up a company here. We brought an external guy in who was sort of new from London Business School as CEO. I took the CTO seat. My professors and UCL took a stake in the company, and we launched it, and started sort of running around trying to see where we could actually apply this in the real world.
So was that building a solution first?
That was definitely a solution looking for a problem, which is one of the hardest ways you can start a company, right? We were looking around for different sectors where this technology could be useful. We found that in certain national security type applications that there was some use. And then we found that in financial services at the time, there was a lot of, this was 2002, right? So very early days. There was a lot of complex derivatives trading going on. And this was, I guess in hindsight, trading all the stuff that was causing the financial crisis a bit later on because of the lack of control around it, like, interest rate swaps and credit default swaps. And the industry at the time had a real problem that there was no electronic representation of this stuff. It was just also faxes flying around and paper. So they came up with electronic representations and they're trying to standardize it. And they had this problem that it wasn't clear how to specify if a representation of a trade was correct or not. My professor, one of my supervisors, was going to advise them on this, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, but he had conflicts and he was too busy. So I put my hand up and I was sort of 25 years old, didn't know anything about financial services, but I said, I'll do it. And then I've never read a book faster than the derivatives book over like a couple of weekends to try and understand what the hell this actually is. And I helped ISDA specify the rules around some of these trades, and we ended up selling the software into financial services. And this was my completely accidental landing in financial services more than 20 years ago. And yeah, we worked from there. We actually then, within 3 years, we ended up merging with another company called Message Automation. And that company then kept scaling and eventually exited to another company called Broadridge. So for me, I guess it was a first entrepreneurial experience, right? I was a very technical person. I had never sold anything before. And I had to sort of fly around, see customers, sell this thing, because, in a startup, either you sell stuff or you die, right? So it was a steep learning curve for me, I think.
Yeah, enterprise sales, there's a lot to learn there, right?
Yeah, for sure. And luckily for me, the company we merged with was run by highly experienced people who'd been doing enterprise sales for 20 years. So I picked up a lot of very, very useful skills within a couple of years. So, which is actually one of the things that I always appreciate about startups that go somewhere. And if you're there at the right place at the right time, you sort of can learn in 2 years what some people don't learn in 20 years. So it's I guess a one-off opportunity sometimes to really accelerate the learning and your trajectory, right?
And so after did you essentially exited that first company?
Yeah.
And then you had, and then how did then the idea of Duco get born?
There was a little break after that because the financial crisis happened, and there was really no point starting a company in 2008 and 2009. So I ended up sort of working on side projects. So, I was working on Computer Go, so the game of Go that I think people now know from AlphaGo and the whole Google thing. I was working on, a different type of matching engine that can sort of match together very disparate sets of data, no matter what the data is. I was working on using natural language to express rules to transform data. So I was doing a lot of this prototyping, and at the same time, I was doing advisory projects for some of the sort of the leading banks in the world. So I was helping what I guess people call tier one banks and some of the infrastructure players, exchanges. I was helping them come up with their data standards and trying to clean up the mess of data that they have in all these different systems. And it was a great time for me because I got so much exposure to systems, what data they have in them, where all the problems are, right? What are people wasting all of their time on every day at work? So it was a great learning experience for Duco, which is the next company I then founded. to see where the problems were, right? And to find a real next problem to solve.
Can you just talk about the data standards piece, because and sorry, the mess of data, because I don't think people really appreciate, because everyone's very aware of, you see like the Nasdaq and the New York Stock Exchange, and you see these very electronified markets, but actually there's half the world's markets are not like that, and there's an absolute mess of data. Can you just talk about that as a problem?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a sort of a glitzy side to financial services, right? Where it's sort of, very smart people writing, algorithmic trading systems, and it's very high tech. And I think what you don't see so much in the real world is what sits behind it. A lot of financial institutions have grown in the past rapidly by acquisition. They often have thousands of different systems. So if you say, I'm just going to make this up here, but let's say, I'm buying, let's say I want to buy some shares in Apple, right? As a consumer, you're probably used to go in an app and you say, click, buy some Apple shares, and, it's all done, right? But in a big financial institutions, the fact that you've just bought this probably flows into 15, 20, 30 different systems. They all have a different view of what you just did, what the risk is of what you just did, what now needs to happen to move the shares around. And some of them are quite old, right? So they will be written in programming languages that nobody understands anymore. Some of them have problems, so the data quality inside them is really bad. So you get this like proliferation of data that gets sent all over the place. And if you then want to find out later what's the truth of what just happened, you have to look in many different places. And if you sort of fast forward the story a little bit, what happens in practice is you have thousands and thousands of people sitting around, making sure that nothing goes wrong, fixing things, when things break. Far more manual work happens in financial services than anybody thinks. And then, of course, as to your question, when you then apply that to very liquid markets or immature markets, right? So if you're in a smaller country in Asia or in Africa where the trading infrastructure is far behind the sort of the trading infrastructure that you would get, say, in the US or the UK, then it's that times two, right? I mean, it's paper, it's faxes, it's all of that stuff.
Yeah, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of emails per day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had this solution looking for a problem. You found the problem with the first company, and then actually you had some time to see more firsthand through talking to banks and advising them and so on in that period.
Yeah.
And then so what was the signal in your mind then to go, okay, let's go for this, and I'm going to go out on my own, set up this company, and I know I can solve this. How did you start? And was it just you when you started, or do you have a few of you?
So it was a two-step thing, right? So I had come up with this sort of natural language stuff to sort of translate data into a usable format, shall we say? Because one of the biggest problems you get in sort of large financial institutions is there are no standards, right? So we could talk about standards all day long, but the 2,000 systems that sit in a large financial institution, consider it as random data formats, whereas data is just lying around, and you have to make sense of it. Which means if you want to process that data, the system you build has to absorb that data in whatever form it is, right? You can't say, oh, you got to clean it up before you give it to me, right? So our mission was, let's take this in as it is. And initially, actually, for a little bit, I was solo selling a sort of a data transformation system. Then I had a co-founder, Michael Marconi, who joined. That was sort of the next step. And he had a very good eye for design and usability and UX. And together we decided that actually we should pivot out of this. We sold a few sort of contracts to IT departments, but we decided actually what we really want to do is help people in the business and in operations departments solve the data mess without having to go to technology. And so we then asked ourselves, what's the biggest problem we're seeing? And the biggest problem we saw was the reconciliation problem. So having to compare the contents of systems all the time to make sure that everything is in sync. And so we decided to sort of park everything we had done and build a completely new system that was a software as a service system where people could, in the cloud, dump their data in, and it would sort of reconcile the data and spot any problems. So we did that from scratch with some investment, with some sort of seed investment from a corporate venture capital fund. And for, I would say 3 years minimum, it was Michael and I and maybe 10 people, and 9 of those were engineers, right? And it was just us running around trying to sell this thing and building a lot of it very, very rapidly in response to early customer feedback.
So what were the steps that in between then, from those early days when there was 10 of you up to then, because it's a multi-$100 million company now, Duco, with 250 members of staff. What were there particular standout milestone moments in that journey from then, which was 15 years ago or so, up till now?
You know, it's funny, but with both companies I've set up, both of them were early to market with something, and meaning the market wasn't ready to buy it. And that is one of the most painful things you can ever have happen to you, because you've essentially identified the correct problem. You've probably built a great solution, but the customers don't see the problem the same way, and they're not quite ready to just buy from you. And in the case of Duco, to sort of focus on that, the thing that was really early is it was 2013 when we launched the Duco platform, and it was 100% in the cloud. Now, people forget how old the cloud is, right? AWS was around since before 2010. But in 2013, financial institutions were absolutely not touching any cloud services, right? Or most of them weren't. And we launched this thing with servers in racks and cages because we had no choice. It was still cloud. It was just our cloud. But I think for the first 2 years, we almost died because no bank wanted to buy this thing. We tried very hard to sell it to them, got nowhere, almost ran out of cash. At some point, we had 2 weeks of cash left in 2015. We recognized what was going on sort of in 2013, pivoted pretty hard again to sell to smaller companies. So we started selling to hedge funds, smaller asset managers, brokers, people who liked that in the cloud you could just get going and who didn't have the same sort of concerns as the banks. And that I think that saved us focusing on smaller companies because we started getting customers. And if you get customers, you get momentum and the market hears about it and, people start paying attention. Oh, this Duco thing seems to be, winning. And then in 2015, finally, we got a bank to sign up. And I would say it was still probably a couple of really, really hard years to really get going and get some acceptance. And during those years, the whole cloud movement came towards us, right? So, the larger financial institutions, the leading ones started to use the cloud and the market started moving towards us. And eventually it became this thing where you had to be on the cloud because why would anybody buy on-premise legacy solutions anymore? So it became a strength. But in the beginning, it was scary and we almost died, I would say.
So I guess there's probably a similar technology wave now with like Gen AI.
For sure.
Because in a similar way, like Gen AI can obviously do a lot of stuff, but financial institutions, because of the regulation that's attached to them and fines if something goes wrong, the adoption of new technology is always at a much slower pace versus the little small market making shop or something, for example.
Yeah.
What's your view then on a kind of Gen AI and where that sits in financial kind of services and institutions at the moment?
Yeah, in terms of market readiness, I think the comparison is quite good. I think it feels a bit like selling cloud would have felt like in 2012, 2013. The difference, I think, is I'm not sure anybody was convinced in 2013 in the large financial institutions that they had to go to the cloud. I think now everybody thinks they have to use AI. But nevertheless, the way it is deployed and the way it is delivered is completely immature still, right? There's no large-scale success stories. The startups that are out there now are not enterprise ready. I would argue that the AI players are not enterprise ready, right? I mean, the sort of uptime requirements and resilience and all of that you would want, can OpenAI and Claude and, Anthropic, can they provide it? I don't think so, right? Not yet. Of course, they've got so much money that they will get there. And I think the startups will get there. In my mind, we're probably 2 years away, at least from major success stories. There's some green shoots of sort of use case specific success. So I'm starting to see some firms getting big adoption by focusing on narrow problems and solving those really well. So we've seen success in sort of the private credit industry, producing credit memos with one company that I've looked at. Data extraction, I think getting data out of PDFs and so on, those use cases are starting to really work and people are deploying them. So we're sort of nibbling around the edges, but very, very far away from the conclusion of what should a bank or an asset manager look like with widespread AI adoption. I think it's a journey.
Just back to Duco. So going forward then, as you kind of had where you were early with what you were doing and the cloud, and then the market kind of catching up with you. At some point, you kind of handed over the relay baton and were running with it, and the business started to grow. You then got acquired a few years later, and you kind of remained at the company for a few years, and now you're kind of stepping away from it. Can you talk through that kind of experience in two parts? I think one about scaling and what was challenging, what did you learn, what was fun, and then the other part was probably letting go of your baby as well at the end of it.
Yeah, scaling. So sort of picking up at the point where we started to have the early customers. Let's say we have 30 customers. Maybe we are now 40 people in the company, let's say, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's the correct match. Or if I don't recall how many people we were with how many customers, but it was sort of that sort of level, right? So we were now selling six-figure a year contracts with a sort of a mid-market client base, maybe a couple of large financial institutions starting to deploy 3 or 4 use cases and growing there. We had always built this as what you call a land and expand business. So you can use this for many things. Let's just get one success story very right. We're going to make sure you absolutely get a great result out of this. And then we hope you will come back and buy some more from us. And that turned out to be true. And our contracts were growing. Our existing client base kept buying more and more from us, which is what you want to see from a good SaaS company. At the same time, I always say, I loved the company when we were up to 15, 20 people in the room. You get this like early stage feeling of togetherness and everybody's racing. And, you're probably having an office party at the end of every week after everybody's worked hard and you're winning. And we used to like print out all the logos of the customers we signed and stick them on the wall. This is our wall of win, right? So ring the bell, so you get this like community that can get stuff done. But it's not a scalable community, right? It's sort of the early stage community. And then we started signing up some larger customers and hiring more people and building a sales team for the first time. And I would say when we were 40, 50 people, it's almost, for me personally, the maximum point of pain. So I was sitting there as CEO, still doing quite a lot. It's not really a CEO job. The way it is a bit later, right? Because you're still doing quite a lot, right? You're probably still the sales lead on quite a lot of stuff, right? Maybe there's some things around product that you still do yourself. There might be a sort of a product leader, but then the bigger vision of where could the company go with the product, it's all you, right? And a lot of hands-on work. And I always recall that first of all, I missed the ball in terms of what was now required from me. With 40 or 50 people, the company needs you to communicate strategy and where the company is going. And it needs you to take some of the leaders in the company, whether that's technology or product or sales, and put effort in around managing that team. And I was at least 6 months too late realizing that that was required from me, until these voices started getting really loud. So we're not really sure where we're going, why we're selling to these guys. We sold this big deal and now we're drowning in feature requests, and like product starts arguing and with sales, and all this stuff starts happening. And I had to snap out of it, right? So that was a big shock to me to sort of say, I'm going to have to really reinvent myself here. We also didn't have enough people to really deliver on everything we promised. So I always recall that 40, 50 people time as sort of a time of maximum pressure and stress. Then we did a Series B investment round, and we scaled this company up quite quickly to over 100 people. And we were growing very, very fast. We're sort of sitting around 80 to 100% growth revenue-wise. And things got a bit easier again. And then with 100 people, where maybe you don't know some people, if you've got a lot of turnover, then it starts to really feel like a CEO job, right? Because now at some point, all you do is communicate and make decisions and be sort of the referee about what should happen in which part of the company. And you always sell. So I think for enterprise B2B, if you don't like selling, don't set up a B2B company. I don't think you could do it as the CEO. And then exit. So your question was what happened there. So Duco was acquired in 2021 by a private equity company. So they bought a majority share of the company. I'm still a shareholder in the company, and I'm still on the board of the company. We agreed that for the first period that they're the new owners of the company, that I would keep running this business to sort of provide continuity. I wasn't in a rush to just walk out of it. So I ran it in the end for 2.5 more years, and it grew. And, as you said, it went to sort of 250 people, probably too many people, then, down a bit. Now I think it's 220 people now. We acquired another company that provides a great sort of AI-based system for extracting data from unstructured documents. And then I handed over as a CEO last year. The handover was fairly smooth. I think the thing that I found tricky was actually being half in the company. I think running it, obviously, it's a company I founded, so great. Just being on the board on the outside, I actually enjoy. The period where I'm half in, that was a bit strange. So I think that's a part I didn't enjoy as much. But now I think it's working well. Looking in from the outside.
That process of finding the exec team or CEO to take the position that you had, were you like fully involved in that, or was that kind of the new owners, or a bit of both?
Well, when I was running it for the new owners, I put a new executive team in place, right? I changed just over half of the executive team after they acquired the company. And I was CEO, so I picked the executive team. The new CEO, I can't hire my successor if I'm not the majority owner of the company, right? So that is their job. I was involved in the process late stage because culture fit is very important, but that's not my job. That's the job of the chairman and of the new owners.
So talking about culture, like you said, the stage you really enjoyed was that early stage when it was like 15 or so of you. Obviously got quite painful, it sounds like, at 40 to 50 people, and then eased off again later on. How did you either maintain or evolve the culture during those different steps?
Yeah. First question is, what do people mean by culture? Because it's sort of this intangible thing, and people have a weird understanding of culture sometimes, right? It's not really the ping pong tables at the beer on Friday. I think the one I like the most is Culture is what happens when people aren't looking, or sort of culture is what happens when the process stops, right? How do people behave? And I think maintaining culture is not a thing. So there's no point pretending that you're going to run a 200-person organization like you ran a 20-person organization, not just in terms of the processes, but also the culture. It just doesn't work that way. So it becomes this process of figuring out what's really, really core and important to the people here. And how do we never give up on those things, but let everything else evolve. And the first time we did a project just thinking about that was when we were 40, 50 people. When before that, it's so organic, you just do your thing, right? But eventually you have to hire, you have to scale, which means you have to bring people in from the outside. And then you need to know what type of people you want, right? You need to know, are the same things important to them that are important to us? Otherwise, you really will destroy the company over time. So I'll give you 2 examples of some of the things that were important to us. One, we had this value, which was keep it simple. Duco is all about simplifying the life of people in operations departments. And we really try to live that, right? It's a 4-letter company name for a reason. It has a 2-letter domain name. It had quite a short contract for enterprise tech. It's a self-service thing where you just get going. We had a brand promise, which was live in 24 hours, results in 7 days. And so we didn't just want this externally. I think we wanted this internally as well, right? If we thought about stuff too much, we wanted to simplify it. Example, we had this huge debate about holiday. How much holiday can we allow? How much do we allow people to carry over? By when does the carryover end? So we just cut through that. We said, screw it. We'll just do unlimited holiday, right? And we did, right? And that worked well for us. So that's a whole different story about how to make that work well. So being clear on sort of keep it simple. We want to lead, not follow was another value. So being clear on some of the core things is what it is for me. Everything else has to evolve. You're also you're usually evolving a company from being a very engineering-led company to a company with sales and commercial functions, and eventually there are more non-engineers than engineers in the company, and so the culture has to evolve. It's a hybrid culture.
So we've spoken a lot about, I suppose, the entrepreneurial type skills and scaling a company, and can you talk about the type of attributes from a personal or a mindset perspective that someone needs to to thrive in this type of environment? Because obviously you're starting off very small and not much structure. It's a lot of hard work. Can you kind of talk through some of those type of attributes that you think are important for someone looking to get into this kind of world?
You mean as an employee rather than as a founder, or
both?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of similarities between early stage employees and founders in some ways. The difference being maybe the risk appetite, but for sure, everybody who is around an early stage situation has to have a real self-starter attitude to anything they do. You see this, and you would have seen this probably in your business as well, is it can be really, really, really difficult hiring people from larger companies who are used to infrastructure and things being in place, right? So, I want to sell something today. Who's going to do the slide deck for me? Can you get me the contacts I need to call in this organization? And it's just not happening, right? I think you show up, you grab something, and you do it. And if the job demands of you that you now, I don't know, go to the shops with the CEO to buy, food and stuff for the customer party and arrange sofas or whatever, you do it. You just do whatever it takes. The resilience attribute is obviously the most important attribute there, right? So the never say die, never give up attitude. You're gonna have so many setbacks, lose so many deals, get to the finish lines with so many contracts that then don't get signed. If you just can't handle rejection or losing, and you're losing 75% of the time. If you're winning 25%, in a B2B business, you're actually at the market average of how many deals you're going to win, right? Which means you're losing, right? And then you're winning. And if that weighs on you psychologically in some way, I don't think this is the business you want to be in, right? You just keep plugging away and grinding. You're grinding your way to success. You're not. This never gets easy. It doesn't get easy at 1 million, 10 million, at 50 million. It never gets easy. So resilience and sort of the self-starter attribute, for me, are the most important.
Even though it is hard work, what can you say about what a great industry it is to be in?
You mean fintech in particular?
And that the kind of cutting edge of technology, and like how exciting it is.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And a lot of us suffer from these first world problems, right? Where we sit around and we go, oh, it's so damn hard to sell in, and they're so mean on the other side, and they've got these complicated processes, and you never know where you stand. But you're completely right that it sometimes pays to reverse this, right? So let's look at the positives. Financial services and insurance this industry is the biggest spender on technology in the world, out of any industry, by a significant factor. And it completely makes sense when you think about it, because there's nothing except data lying around. And there's no physical product, right? There's just data, right? There's cash, there's complicated transactions, there's customer data, and we're sort of processing that and offering products around it. And we're selling to companies where the IT budget could be $5 billion in one company. So what a luxury problem to sort of build businesses that sell to businesses like that, right? And also the fact that once you make it and you build a product, it usually is around for 10, 20 years. So you're not eating hand to mouth. I still remember during COVID, I have friends who run events businesses that went to zero. And Duco grew well during COVID. And not only, we panicked for about a month, and then we realized actually, the financial markets aren't doing so badly, and it just keeps going. So it's a very steady environment to sell into in many ways. And it's a market where there are a lot of buyers. And, I count my blessings every day to have always been in markets where people continuously buy stuff, and you're never sort of wondering, is my business just going to go away next year? So for, say, a younger person or somebody who wants to get involved from the outside, I think that's a huge bonus, right? It's even in a growth company, it's just far less risky than a growth company that sells B2C, for example.
So you said you had to kind of reinvent yourself maybe twice, maybe more, but the two times that I've got was once when you started and you were super technical and you didn't know how to sell, and you just had to learn it. And you were lucky enough to actually get acquired by a company where you could learn from people that have been doing it for a long time. And you said earlier about if you want to get into kind of enterprise or B2B, you have to know how to sell, because it's all about that. And then the other time was when you said the company was like, when Duco was like 40 to 50 people, and that was like the maximum pain. And you didn't kind of learn quick enough that you should be communicating, to all the team about the direction and the vision and so on. Is there anything that you would have done differently if you kind of went back in time?
With the first company, I don't think so, because I would be rewriting history, right? I almost think of that as a learning journey. With Duco, I thought about this a lot, and as an entrepreneur, especially first time scaling something, you inevitably, you end up making tons of mistakes, right? Tons of hiring mistakes, tons of probably sales strategy mistakes, because there's probably lists of mistakes in the hundreds. I think, knowing what I know now, there's probably 2 years that could be shaved off the journey and you'd get to the same result. I was fortunate that I ended up with a couple of very good mentors and board members over these years. I think if I'd had them earlier and listened to them actively earlier, I think that would have made a big difference, because I did listen to them and to the very direct feedback. And, I think there's a whole separate topic about how receptive you are to feedback, because if you're going to go very far as a founder and you have no self-awareness and you're not receptive to feedback, you're going nowhere. There's no way you figure this out all yourself without taking input from people who've done it before. So what would I do? I think if you take a Series A investment from a venture capitalist, stick an independent board member on the board who has built a business, or find other people who've built a business and just talk to them regularly. And it needs to be, so there's a whole industry of advisors out there who want to advise CEOs but have never done it. That I would not do that. You're actually better off listening to somebody who's like built a business unit from scratch in a large company than an advisor who's never done anything, right? But surrounding yourself with the right people, and sometimes people have done great things and the personal chemistry isn't right and it doesn't work when you talk to them. So that needs to be right too. But I think just having people around you who can help you on the journey is super impactful. And when that started happening for me, it started making a very, very big difference, rapidly.
And so what's next for you? It sounds like now actually you're probably playing that role of more of the helping other companies, learning through some of the mistakes you may have learned, and to help shave off that time and be more efficient. Is that kind of what you're doing now?
I'm doing a bit of that. In London, our ecosystem is younger than it is in Silicon Valley. I feel like it's really kicked in the last 10 years, I would say. When I was first doing some of this 20 years ago, there wasn't that much of an ecosystem or exited founders, right, who'd really been through a bigger journey. There are more now. I'm trying to repay my debt with sort of some of the advice I got by where I can be helpful, helping founders that are scaling up. I try to do that when people already have an idea of what their product is and some revenue. Because I think the shortage in the UK especially is people who have scaled from, say, 10 million upwards, where you start to get a different set of problems. 0 to 1 is the hardest thing in the world, and most people don't make it. And then 1 to 5, shall we say, is sort of still hard work, finding the right customers. Then it becomes about scale and building teams and so on. And I'm trying to help there because we have a shortage. And I hope I can play a part in making some more people successful so they can then, help. And this becomes a self-reinforcing thing, right? Where we build a bigger and better ecosystem. So I'm focused on that. I'm investing, obviously. I'm an investor in venture capital and private equity funds. And then what's next after that? I don't know, maybe one more. Maybe one more. I want to take some time to find a because a solution without a problem is not something I'm doing again. It's too hard.
And how can people follow you or get in contact with you? Where's the best place?
On LinkedIn, for sure, with me. I post on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn, add me on LinkedIn. And one other thing I would say, especially if it's young people trying to sort of figure out what to do, this isn't just with me, but people don't ask enough. I think we've had people just come up in the past and say, hey, I don't know what to do this summer, but I really like the company. Can I get an internship and so, or, and sure, you're going to get a lot of no's with that, but just ask, right? Because people do get these jobs, and we have put people into these seats, and some of them are there 5 years later, straight out of school, into Duco, now working in operations, in a growth company, and then able to move into many, many different jobs afterwards, right? So people should just ask more, I think.
Yeah, great advice. Christian, thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.